Okay.
Well, this is Dave Gaddis. Today is March 19th, 2018, and we're interviewing Alan Efrussy here on the campus of the University of Texas at Arlington. So, welcome, Alan.
Thank you very much, David.
Well, why don't we start at the very beginning, and where were you born and when?
Okay, but before we go, let me, for the record, thank you very, very much, David, FAICP, for your time and effort in interviewing me. I consider this an enormous honor, and I also thank your colleagues, the Texas chapter of American Planning Association. This is a great honor for me, and I appreciate very much being here.
Just can't evade the question.
No, okay.
When and where were you born?
Okay. I was born in Chicago, Illinois, May 6, 1937, and you history buffs may recognize that was the date the Hindenburg crashed. So that stayed with me for a long time.
So what were your parents doing in Chicago that had them there?
Okay, well, both my mother was born in Russia, my father was born in Chicago, and my father was the first in his family to go to university. He was the valedictorian of his 1934 University of Illinois pharmacy class, and he and my mother lived there their whole lives, my whole life, except when I left to go to school and into the Navy and moved down here. I may be jumping ahead a little bit.
Yeah. So you stayed in Chicago through high school and...
Yes, I stayed. I lived in Chicago my whole life.
And then you went to college in Chicago?
Well, I went, at that time, the University of Illinois had two campuses. One, the major one, was over 100 years old at Champaign-Urbana. They also had a branch in Chicago, which would have been less expensive for my parents and myself. It was called Navy Pier, which, in fact, what it was a training area extending out into Lake Michigan, and I went there for the first 2 years, and then I transferred to the Champaign-Urbana, Illinois campus.
Okay, what did you study there?
Well, my major was history, and my degree was in history and out of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences.
Okay, any particular area of history?
Well, the University of Illinois, as you may know, is one of the top history departments in the United States for a very long time, so you have to have a basic course that covers prehistory all the way up to that time, the late 50s. But I focused on an ancient history, intellectual history, and medieval history. I really enjoyed that very much.
Okay. And what did you do after you got your degree?
I went into the Navy for a couple of years after that, and served on an aircraft carrier for several years.
Okay. And what was your job on the aircraft carrier?
Well, an aircraft carrier, you might imagine, is divided like a corporation, even like a city, into sections. They're called divisions, nowhere near as large as an Army division. And each division had its own responsibilities: navigation, cooking, armament, etc. I was in aviation supply. Our function was to inventory, order, store, and designate parts of aircraft, including armament. That required a top secret clearance for a little while, and I enjoyed that very much. We could actually construct different kinds of aircraft from scratch on that airplane. Most people didn't know that, but I very much enjoyed that job.
Okay. You said you stayed in for a few years?
Well, yes, I was drafted at the time, and time was 2 years, and I had a chance to travel essentially the Western Hemisphere.
Okay. And when your time was up, what did you decide to do then?
Well, partly because I was able to travel to France, England, Scotland, Ireland, and Italy. My interest in history was expanded into a greater history of cities themselves. And I was in essentially 15 or 16 years after the end of World War II. I'm actually answering your question. And so that stimulated a great interest in redevelopment and rehabilitation of a lot of cities that were devastated in World War II, particularly in England, less so in Germany. And so when I came out of the service through the GI Bill, I enrolled in graduate school At that time, now we're talking about 50 years ago, there were maybe 4 or 6 schools in the United States that offered degrees or supportive degrees in urban planning. Now, as you know, there's over 100. And I enrolled in Roosevelt University and in a urban studies, urban planning program, had the opportunity to have teachers who were actually practicing in Chicago, which was at that time certainly a great urban planning inventory. And I did that and got my master's, and then through a whole series leading up to now, I began to serve in the planning profession in public and private enterprises.
But you must have started working before you finished your degree.
I did, and it's interesting because at that time, particularly in Chicago and other larger cities, there was such a shortage of urban planners, recognizing around the mid-60s the amplification of urban planning in the United States. If you make a commitment you're going to do that, or if you have a degree that was somewhat closely aligned, political science, geography, history, et cetera, notwithstanding architecture, landscape architecture, you could get beginning jobs, which I was able to do and learn quickly on the spot. And actually, it had helped me in my graduate studies as well.
Okay, and what was your first job?
My first job was in the Chicago Regional Office of the Department of Housing and Urban Development, the Model Cities program. And I was a community planner for communities in Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And I enjoyed that. I wasn't there a very long time, but I learned a lot.
Okay. For some people who may not be familiar with it, what did the Model Cities program do?
What the Model Cities program was doing, it was part of LBJ's Better Society program. The function mainly was to go into communities or parts of communities that were challenged by physical, economic problems and try to enhance and develop them using urban planning techniques and procedures. It involved, of course, a great deal of involvement with local communities, oftentimes religious institutions, churches, and happily we made inroads, because this was, except for some of the activities in the 30s, the first time in 20 years that the federal government was really coming in and making a commitment to try to help these communities.
And just to make a note, you started that job in 1967?
Yes, August 9th, 1967, and August 9th of last year is 50 years I was a planner.
Okay, well, make sure we made note of that.
Yes.
It's quite an accomplishment.
Thank you, sir.
So after you worked at HUD, where did you go from there?
From there, let me try where I went to. I think after.
Did you go to Rolf Campbell?
Yes, I went to Rolf Campbell and Associates, which was a planning consulting firm. That was, of course, HUD was a public sector, and Rolf Campbell he broke off from another firm called Tech Search out of Wilmette, Illinois, and he was Lake Bluff, Illinois. And I learned an enormous amount there. It was a small firm. The president of the company was a professor of civil engineering at Northwestern. You let me know if I'm going too much, if I'm amplifying too much. And the vice president was a professor of economics at the University of Illinois, and my boss was assistant vice president. He had a bachelor's in landscape architecture and a master's in urban planning from Michigan State back in 1952.
And his name?
His name was Rolf Campbell, and
okay.
he broke off Tech Search and started his own firm, and he brought me and several other people with him. And that inculcated in me the critical importance of multidisciplinary input early on urban planning projects. So it was a wonderful opportunity for me and a wonderful educational experience. There were so few urban planners around, although, as an aside, and you probably know this, the University of Illinois was, I think, the third or fourth school in the country to have actually an urban planning program. I think Harvard in the late 20s, then Cornell, then University of Illinois, and then Michigan or Michigan State. But there were very few, and I just was thrown in, very similarly, my experience in the military, and started to do comprehensive plans and zoning in other cases, and it was a wonderful experience for me.
You remember any of the projects you worked on?
Yes. I worked on a comprehensive plan almost totally on my own for North Chicago, Illinois. You may already know this. There's a North Chicago, East Chicago, Indiana, South Chicago, and West Chicago, and those last three in Illinois. And I worked on a comprehensive plan. I did some zoning cases, some economic development, and worked with another planner on an expanded comprehensive plan for Des Plaines, Illinois. I guess the French would pronounce it Des Plaines. And had an old abandoned naval air station used in World War II. It was very interesting. And Willowbrook, Illinois, and that's going back now almost 50 years, but those were a lot of the projects that I was working on.
And at some point in time during that period, you got a certificate from Cornell?
Well, yeah, what happened was I was looking to try to expand my knowledge, and I was reading literature and getting as much information I could. And they had a one-week intensive program at Cornell, and my company paid for it. I drove my car up. It was 1 week. It was historic preservation planning, and it was taught by very esteemed historic preservation professors at Cornell, and was very interesting. I learned a great deal.
And so after you left Campbell, where did you end up?
I'm trying to remember. You have the sheet in front of you there.
How about Lombard?
Lombard, Illinois, yes, I appreciate that. For those of you watching, I'm going to be 81 in a few weeks, so bear with me. Lombard, Illinois is in DuPage County, Illinois. It's called the Lilac City. The lilac purple are its colors. And I was hired largely because of my experience with Rolf Campbell and HUD. And it turns out I was the first professional planner they ever had. And I updated their comprehensive plan 1972 to 1992, made presentations before P&Z and Consul, and worked on a lot of private development activity. And again, early mid-30s, that was a wonderful experience for me as well.
Okay. And then after that, you went to work for DuPage?
Yes. DuPage County, you don't mind me giving a little context on this. Okay, DuPage County, Illinois, during the 70s was one of the 5 fastest growing counties in the United States. And Joseph Abel was a director, a graduate of the University of Illinois Planning School. And Lombard, Illinois was one of the municipalities in DuPage County, of which there were 34 municipalities, and the rest was the county, unincorporated area. So while I was at Lombard, Illinois, I had an opportunity to coordinate with him. And one day he had 2 of his planners take me to dinner, and they started talking to me, and then I went back to my job, and then I got a call, and I said, Mr. Abel said, would you be interested in being the director of Community Assistance Planning Division in DuPage County? I said, yeah, I'd love to do that. So I went there, and parallel with that, I got my master's degree in urban planning, urban studies, graduated with honors, very, very happy about that.
And that was from Roosevelt? Roosevelt
University, yeah. And then my job was to coordinate the comprehensive plans in all 34 municipalities. Some had them that were 5, 10 years old, some none at all, some in different stages. And my job was to coordinate all of those, to integrate them into the long-range staff, a separate staff in the DuPage County Regional Planning Commission, I was preparing a county-wide plan, and obviously you want to make those things integrate. That started I started there in November of '72 in DuPage County, and I left in October of '79, and all during that time we were doing all this. It took a long time to do that. In addition to that, part of it was made a little bit easier because in Illinois, it was legal to have zoning in the counties. When, as you know, Texas, that's not the case, and I think there's 2 other states in the union that do not have zoning in the county. So that was my job. In addition to that, I worked on another major job I had was testifying, and it evolved into me becoming a designated bona fide expert witness on land use and zoning cases in DuPage County Circuit Court, which was very, very interesting, really challenging. And I testified in several dozen cases, happily was able to have the county's position win on a number of cases, and most of those. And in the process, many of the judges and a lot of the attorneys were not familiar with zoning and land use, so as part of the testifying, it included it. As an aside, one of the judges was Judge Woodward, who is Bob Woodward's dad from Woodward and Bernstein. So that was very interesting for me.
Okay. Any other colleagues at the Regional Planning Commission that you remember?
Yeah, well, Joe Abel was certainly a mentor of mine. Jim Smith was assistant director, a brilliant young man, bachelor's and master's in planning from Illinois, and a master's in public administration from Illinois. And some young man who just graduated from Cornell University master's program in the early '70s, Bob Huff. Robert Huff, I haven't kept in touch with him, but a fine colleague, and Rich Patton, who was the environmental planner, outstanding person, outstanding human being, and those people who remained in my professional and personal memory for as long as I'm around.
Well, the same thing with your graduate program at Roosevelt. Do you remember any of the faculty or students that stand out to you?
Yes, one in particular, Paul Zimmer. Paul Zimmer was one of my urban planning professors. He was on the City of Chicago Planning Commission and also was a professor of urban studies and urban planning. And he stands out most of all to me.
So in 1979, you decided to get up and move. What happened there?
Well, in 1979, I turned 41, and I was the comprehensive plan was adopted and completed in 1978 for the county. I still enjoyed my work very much, and I was talking to other colleagues and said, you know, maybe let me see what else is available. And at that time, there was no internet to speak of the way it is now, and so the American Planning Association, which the American Institute of, well, the American Planning Association, they put out every 2 weeks a newsletter, a job newsletter in print, and I would get that, and I saw assistant director, City of Dallas, Texas, and after I showed it to a couple of my friends, after they stopped laughing about my opportunity to go there, several said, you know, take a shot, take a chance. Long story short, I did. It turned out there were 180 applicants from across the country. In October of '79, I was invited down for an interview, and I walked into the room. There was Director of Planning, Jack Shoup, and about 12, or never forget it, it was a table twice as long as this, 12 or 15 department heads, and they talked to me for about 2.5 hours. And then I left, and my wife and I came down. First time we were in Dallas and flew back, and a week later I got a call and told her that if I want the job, I have it. So I thought that my son was only 4 years old at the time, and I said, this is a wonderful opportunity. Let me go ahead and try and do it. And my wife has been always supportive. We moved down, and I've been in Texas. Next year will be 40 years, and very happy I made that decision.
Well, you mentioned APA. Did you belong to AIP or ASPO?
Well, I belonged to, it was called ASPO at the time, American Society of Planning Officials, which, as you know, went back, I think 1917, if I'm not mistaken. And so I made a commitment that I wanted to be, at that time it was AIP, American Institute of Planners. And as you know a lot of things. But in October of '78, it was changed to the American Institute of Certified Planners, and I remember the discussion that took place in a lot of the literature that, American Society of Civil Engineers, landscape architects, they have this certification context, and APA wanted to do that. So I began studying for that, and long story short, there was a national convention in Cincinnati in '78, and I went there. And I took my test. Do you want me to tell you about it?
Sure.
Okay. I don't want to intrude on the format that you have here.
Well,
Okay.
There is no format.
Okay, so one of the planners who was in AIP at the time met me, I think it was a Tuesday morning, and he sat down and he told me what's going to be done, et cetera, and you're going to go in a room, and there's going to be a large table, and there'll be 7 or 9 AIP planners up there. And at that time, David, what you had to do was read a lot of literature. There were 7 or 8 different specialties: housing, transportation, comprehensive plan. You had to read the literature, and then you would take a test. So long story short, I went and I took a test, multiple choice, for about an hour. Then I walked into this room. It was like the Supreme Court. These guys are all sitting up there. And they said, we see that my specialty was comprehensive planning, and that was my specialty in graduate school, plus British Newtown planning, and other planning as well. So they started asking me questions. That went on for about 45 or 50 minutes. And I did the best I could. I was honest about it. They asked me questions about zoning. They focused in on comprehensive planning. And I was very impressed with the quality of the questions. And I said, thank you very much, Alan. And the guy who led me and sat there all the time, and he walked me out, I said, we'll let you know. I said, I have no idea how I did. Well, we'll see what happens. So 2 weeks later, I get a letter saying, congratulations, you're now a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners. Now, my certificate actually says charter member on it. The only other guy, I think you may be a charter member, I don't know. The only other guy that I know for sure is Jerry Hebert. He's a charter member, but there's got to be other people who are. So very honored by that.
So you started down in Dallas.
Yes.
What kinds of projects did you work on when you were in Dallas?
Oh, well, I understood from the director that one of the major reasons that they thought I had opportunity, the fact, and I told my wife I was going to do this, because they asked me what do you think are some of the problems, and what do you think are contributions you could make? Well, I talked about downtown and coordination, and I talked about how important it was to have a comprehensive plan. So when I said I feel strongly we should have a comprehensive plan for the city of Dallas, and then update zoning in association with that. And at that time, there was one project which we did. Frankly, it wasn't the way I wanted it, but that was Dallas. They did what they wanted to do. And then during that time downtown, they were talking about the arts district, and several people in the city manager's office were talking about individual isolated buildings. I said, with all respect, that's fine, but take a look at the entire area, integrate the buildings with the area, and even the areas surrounding. I got involved in zoning. Actually, virtually every project I had the opportunity to put my hands or my thought on each one of those, but that's not practical. They had 6 divisions, and each division had a project manager with staff underneath. So to avoid duplication of effort, I told the director, let me focus in on others, on my own set of projects. So it's time and cost efficient. And he agreed, and I stayed there for a couple of years. There were serious budget questions challenging the work we were doing and staff, and so I thought it would be time for me to. I wasn't going to be able to do the projects that I wanted to do, and there was even a question as to whether or not I'd even be able to do it. So I then started to look, not to go back to Illinois under any circumstance, but to see opportunities in the Metroplex area.
Well, you mentioned that Jack Shoup was the planning director.
Yes,
Do
sir.
you remember who the city manager and mayor were, or some of the other staff members in the planning department?
Mr. Schrader was the city,
George?
yeah, and the mayor, I forgot his name, this is embarrassing. That's 50 years. I can, they had several at the time.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I forgot.
Any other staff colleagues?
Yes. By far my closest staff colleague there who, and I know as an aside without trying to be funny about it, he was a Yankee too, Gary Sieb, Michigan State person, he was a bachelor's and master's in planning. He was in charge of the zoning division. I would consider him, he retired last year from being in Coppell for a long time, and I would consider him my closest professional ally in that department.
Okay.
Yeah.
So after you left Dallas, you went back into consulting?
Yes.
Worked for
Freeze.
Burnett Baldwin?
Yeah, Burnett Baldwin. Naud Burnett was, he taught landscape architecture, I think, A&M, and he started his own firm. And David Baldwin, a young, extremely talented landscape architect who's still practicing now, and I think he's had his own company for about 15, 16 years now. They had no urban planner, and so they brought me on as the urban planner, and I coordinated with them, and the city, parallel with that, had let out opportunities for individual firms to submit proposals for the Arts District. We did that too, but Sasaki and Associates, world famous design firm, got that, which is fine. They did a fine job, but we were able to put our hat in the ring, so to speak, and we did get an audience. And I tried to obtain individual planning projects for about a year and a half, 2 years, and it was very difficult because of the ingrained other consulting firms or personages, J.T. Duncan, Freeze and Nichols, other planning firms, but I tried, and I still had an opportunity to be exposed more directly with the art and science of landscape architecture. And again, I learned a great deal. I met a lot of nice people too.
So then you decided to go with your competition with Freeze and Nichols?
Well, what happened again, I would still get the literature from the American Planning Association on jobs. I think it was called Job News or whatever. It's come out once a month or every 2 weeks, and I'll remain on that because I wanted to see what's available and also what would the background be for some of these jobs. So it turns out that our mutual colleague Craig Farmer was the chief planner at Freeze and Nichols, and I think this was '83, early '83, and that he left to go into the public sector again, and so that job became available. I interviewed with the office manager, George Heumann, in the Austin office, and I was able to get the job. And I really liked that. I worked on comprehensive plans and some site plans in Georgetown and Austin, and was able to work directly on the plans for San Marcos and South Texas, I think. What was Julie's,
McAllen?
yeah, McAllen. And I was able to work almost exclusively on McAllen. And Craig Farmer did a brilliant job almost completing San Marcos. I had the opportunity to finish that, bring it to fruition and be adopted. And those two plans in '84 won the Texas Chapter Merit Award. And I had an opportunity to work with a number of really wonderful people at Efrussy Nichols, wonderful engineers. They had mechanical, they had structural, mostly civil, and they did water, bridge, civil, wonderful people. But as time went on, they didn't have the amplified urban planning depth that they do now, and so I look for another opportunity.
And just as a point of interest, I suppose, that's where I first met you.
Yes.
Craig and I interviewed you one night in a restaurant, I recall, but when you were applying for a job, so for the Efrussy Nichols job. So I don't know if you remember that.
I apologize. I don't remember
that's
that.
Okay, there's lots of stuff I don't remember either.
Okay, for the audience, you hear two experienced planners who don't remember everything. So, but I do remember. I met Craig before, but I do remember the first time I met you. And I've known you for 34 years and Craig for 34 or 35. You were sitting in one of the rooms at Efrussy Nichols in the Austin office, and I introduced to you as the environmental planner. So I've known you, and then you advanced yourself too. So I enjoyed working there.
So in '84, you decided to go back to the private sector? You went to work for Richardson?
Yes. Again, what I was doing candidly, trying to amplify the Efrussy Nichols, I'm going back a little bit, David, try to amplify Efrussy Nichols' comprehensive planning programs. In large measure, what they were, and you know this better than most working there, they were supportive civil engineering programs with population projections, some land use projections. And so they need the population projections for population equivalents and land use equivalents. But I wanted to amplify that much more. There didn't seem to be that much opportunity, with all due respect to them, but they were wonderful people. I enjoyed working there. And so, again, I saw that Richardson had an opportunity for a transportation planner. And so I interviewed with Jerry Hebert, and it turns out that they needed a person to update their comprehensive plan. Now, as I recall, the first one they did was 1962. It was a good one. So, long story short, I interviewed with him, and I interviewed with the assistant city manager at that time, and he hired me, and I was there from October '84 to April '87, and it was reinforced by the manager, the assistant manager. They didn't have any more money for that, so in April of '87, I had to leave, but I was able to complete the comprehensive plan, and we had some unique, at that time, city-oriented television programs, a lot of public survey, and again, in '86 and '87, won I think, a North Central Texas Merit Award for public participation. And the plan was adopted a year after I left and printed in '88. In '87, I left and I went to McKinney.
And so Jerry Hebert was the planning director?
He was the planning director, and he then evolved into, I think, assistant city manager or deputy city manager.
Any other staff members at Richardson that you particularly?
Monica.
Well, she's changed names.
Yeah, she's changed. Monica was in charge of zoning. She did a wonderful job. And Jim Smith.
She was Monica Willard? Maybe?
Yeah, Monica Willard, yes. That's exactly right. And then Jim Smith was the landscape architect on staff, and he did a wonderful job. We became pretty good friends, and he's since, I believe, retired up in North or South Dakota. And I work closely with a lot of the department heads. I really enjoyed that job very much. Very nice people.
Okay. So after you left Richardson, where'd you end up?
I applied for the directorship in McKinney.
Okay.
And in that case, I was taken to lunch by, I got an audience because I applied, and the city manager at that time interviewed me. And long story short, he hired me, and I was there from 87 to 94. And as you know, McKinney had a long history of serious commitment to good planning. And my job was to present all the zoning, all the development application before the Planning and Zoning Commission, City Council, coordinate with North Central Texas Council of Governments, coordinate with Collin County Regional Open Space Program, work with all the developments, really hands-on, in-depth directorship. And we then worked with J.T. Duncan and Associates, Dan Sefco, who I've known for many, many years. I consider him a close and dear professional friend. And we then coordinated with the school district, and we did something which I still think is relatively unique. We also created, as part of that, David, a fiscal impact analysis to see what it would take with taxes, public monies, to pay for the recommendations over decades in the comprehensive plan. Those three things, the comprehensive plan, the school site study, and the fiscal impact analysis, were combined together into a strategic plan, and we won the 1990 Strategic Planning Award, which I'm very proud of, very happy about. And I stayed there till 94. And the depth of the opportunity with the comprehensive plan completed, also I had opportunity to work on the historic preservation program for downtown, which I'm very proud of. The McKinney downtown is doing a good job. Economic development program. And so then I looked for other opportunities.
So was McKinney booming yet, or was it just at the start of?
We're gonna get to that in a second. When I left, the population was 32,000. Whoops. And I made a projection that if they did what they wanted on the comprehensive plan at that time, they'd go to a population of 120,000, and it was simple to do. Now you have computer models. All you do is take the land use, the acreage, assign the population to it. You know it. You could do it in your sleep, and it's fairly easy to get what the population would be. I said to be 120,000 people, you need to, if that's what you want, that's your choice. You're going to have to annex property, extension of utilities, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we'll see. This is a good plan. We'll see. So now it's like 160, 180,000. So that was part of the growth spurt. So does that answer your question on that one? Yeah, okay.
Any other staff members at McKinney that stand out?
Let's see. Jack Carr was the director of planning, engineering. He's at the University of Illinois too. I think now he's director of engineering, or else an assistant city manager in Plano. It's interesting. He graduated from University of Illinois in '79, worked for some consulting firm for a half year, and then was in McKinney until 2013, like 32 or 33 years. Then he went to Plano. Very bright guy. Illinois has, for decades, a wonderful civil engineering program. And several of the folks in the other engineering inspectors, yeah, there were a number of people, but you know, it's been 24, 25 years.
Okay, so after McKinney You went to Rowlett?
Yes, because Rowlett was having some other additional opportunities, so I applied for Director of Planning there. I was interviewed by Mr. Gibson, the city manager, and he hired me. And again, once again, there was a full-time, in-depth Director of Planning program. I was able to get involved in the comprehensive planning program. There we used a consulting firm, but I was the project manager, also updated the zoning ordinance, and also worked on the first DART-oriented, TOD-oriented train stop serving Rowlett. Was able to, am I jumping ahead too much? No, okay. Work with the city of Dallas. They owned a substantial piece of property in the southern portion of the city. And bottom line, we were able to purchase it. And we were able to be Rowlett in conjunction with other planners, develop a zoning, land use and zoning around Lake Ray Hubbard, which the city owned. It was a water supply. Other cities took it as a model. It was adopted, and I'm very proud of that effort too.
You did the comprehensive plan for Rowlett, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but the substantial work was done by the consultant. But I was the project manager on that and brought all zoning, site plan, and plat projects to Planning Zoning Commission City Council.
And who was the consultant on the comp plan? Rowlett. Was it Duncan Zefko or
No.
somebody else?
I think it was, I forgot who it was.
Okay.
Each case, it wasn't a hard case.
Okay. Also during this period, you got another certificate from Harvard this time?
Yeah, but this was for 4 or 5 days. It was like, it wasn't a 2-month thing. It was like a Thursday night to a Sunday afternoon. They had planners from actually all over the world, and it was nonstop from 7 in the morning to 11 o'clock at night on master planning, all different kinds of master planning. All over the world, and you sat in the audience. The people who were there were themselves really accomplished urban planners from the United Kingdom, from South America, from Africa, Asia. It was, I learned a great deal. And if you stay there and you participate, they give you the certificate. And that was, yeah.
Okay, then after that, you went to Fairview in
Yes.
2002?
Yes. The way this worked was, John Godwin was hired as the assistant city manager by Mr. Gibson, who was the city manager in Rowlett. And John Godwin had worked in Longview prior to that for Mr. Gibson. He then went to Florida, worked as county budget director, and then Mr. Gibson hired him back in '94. So he was directly my boss. Mr. Gibson was, the city manager was my boss until John Godwin came on as the ACM. And John Godwin and I worked there. He came in, I came there in '94. He came in, I think, March of '95, and he worked till to 2002, and opportunity for Fairview city manager opened up, and he asked me to join him. And I was getting close to retiring. I was, and that was 2002, and so I was, approaching 70. He said, why don't you come on up there and be the first professional city manager? So that would be the second city in 35 years where I started a planning program. So I did. And we worked on the comprehensive plan. And again, the consultants, we interviewed the major ones. That was done. They never had a comprehensive plan before. They never had a professionally trained planner before. So I did all the zoning and made presentation before Planning Commission and City Council. And what I had to do in the other communities where you make a recommendation and you put some justification. In this case, I had to do more because in addition to making a recommendation, I was also trying to educate them at the same time. And I think that worked out pretty well. They were responsive. And parallel with that was a 200-acre Fairview community development, enormous commercial-oriented development. Now it's added, when I left even, they had multiple family, and now they have a hotel and even more multiple family. It was an outdoor-oriented shopping center, very successful. And Stacy Road divides Allen from Fairview, so I worked very closely with the staff there, and it was challenging because their motto was keeping it country. So while this development was taking place, we had to let them know that we could still maintain 1 and 2 and 3 acre lots east of Highway 5, but they needed to have a substantial base. We could buffer this off. Stacy Road 5, 75, and other roads north could buffer this off, and it's been very successful. And it's, I was there from 2002 to 2012, and I was. We also created in 2005 the Regional Transportation Corridor Study, going from, I know you know this, you want me to respond, from Dallas to McKinney and all the municipalities in between. The councils approved by resolution a multi-city rail corridor, and along each of those strategic stops were TODs, transit-oriented developments, which really 10 or 12 years ago began to take on currency in the planning profession, although it's been around in Europe and other places for decades. But that was adopted in 2005. And also, I was able to participate in the Collin County Regional Open Space Plan, which in my opinion may very well be the best county park recreation open space master plan in the United States. It was updated. It's been updated over the last couple of years. So I very much enjoyed my experience there.
So in 2012, you retired?
Well, that's exactly right. I retired, and at that time, the city manager, now I had worked for him in Rowlett, and now in Fairview, he went to Paris, Texas. He said, why don't you come to Paris, retire, and come to Paris, Texas. And I don't have the opportunity to have, and I'm not sure I need a full-time person, but once you retire, work here half-time. So in December 2012, I began working a half a week, and I still am, in Paris, Texas, for John Godwin. Now this is the third municipality, and so 24 years I've been working for him in 3 municipalities, which has been a wonderful personal and professional opportunity for me. He's, I never told it to his face, but it would be considered brown-nosing, but I'll say it in here. He's a brilliant guy, superb people skills, a practical person, common sense, but great technical professional skills. And so now for the third community, I'm the first person who was professionally trained as an urban planner. And it's interesting because the municipality, as you know, is very, very important in the history of Texas, cotton area, and it's almost an oasis in Lamar County because surrounding it, unlike the Metroplex where you go to a community and you cross the street, you're another functioning community. You cross the street, you're in Lamar County, which is highly rural. There's about 25,000 people. It's been the same population, almost the same since the early 50s. Similar to Marshall, Texas, which is the is the same population since the 50s, and that was Mr. Godwin's hometown. So same situation. I bring all the Planning and Zoning Commission and all development reviews, proposals to the Planning and Zoning Commission, make the presentation there and before City Council. And it's really interesting because the city is well over 100 years old, and there's probably few municipalities in the United States that can claim a comprehensive plan going back 100 years. They had a Kansas City firm. They had a big fire, you may know, a huge fire in 1915 and 1916. They had a comprehensive plan, a City Beautiful movement, remember from graduate school, by a famous architect in Kansas City, and it was their first comprehensive plan.
Is it George Kessler? Or
No, it wasn't Kessler. It was a different person.
Okay.
And it was, you could still use those concepts today. So I'm going to make a point here, nothing negative, it's just a matter of fact. Jump ahead to 1966, and one of the deans of Texas planning, Marvin Springer, did their plan. Jump ahead to 81, one of the other deans, J.T. Duncan, did their comprehensive plan. Jump ahead to 2001, Butcher, Willis, and Ratcliffe, a nationally known firm. I think it's absorbed by Lockwood now. It was, again, out of Kansas City. And this is a multidisciplinary firm with architects, landscape architects, urban planners, civil engineers. Did what I consider one of the best comprehensive plans I've seen for a community this size at any time. Parallel with that, they never ever hired a professionally trained urban planner. Never. I was the first one. So I've been able, and what's very critical here is the city manager understands the value of planning. Otherwise I couldn't do or have the context that I was able to work in even now. So again, David, as I make my recommendations, I also include why we do this. And I've been there now part-time 5 years. If you could press the time, it would probably be about 3¼ years. But I was able to do a major airport planning study, which airport planners and civil engineers at the FAA say is state-of-the-art, but it required annexing a lot of property, but the city decided to disannex property, and as you know, in Texas, you can't annex property for 10 years once it's disannexed, and integrate reasons, the relationship of zoning to planning to long-range planning. The 2001 comprehensive plan was adopted by P&Z and Council, but no one's implemented it, so I'm taking pieces of it. Right now, the city manager and the city civil engineer, who's a graduate of this institution, and is working with me, and we're going to update at least parts of it to educate. And we're doing other studies as well. There's a deep commitment to enhancing the downtown. We're working on that. It has the Trail de Paris, which is part of a 132-mile extension all the way going to Farmersville. And in the early 90s, I worked from Dallas up to McKinney with HNTB consulting firm with a linkage system. And if we can do that, maybe link that up in the future, that would be, worldwide. We have people coming from other countries and other parts of the country to ride the bikes through there. So those are some of the things that I'm working on.
Okay. Well, we mentioned early on about your early activity in APA and AICP. And
yes, sir.
Did you become any more involvement? Did you ever run for office or anything? I think you helped author part of a guide to urban planning.
Yes. I think I ran, when I worked with Jerry, this is now 30 years ago, I think I ran to be assistant director for AP. I didn't make that because I was warned you're not known that much here in Texas, and it turned out to be that way. So I hadn't run for office, but I was asked by, and I'm David, I'm sorry, I was asked by several planners who were involved with the APA Federation and a couple of professors from here. I think Bob Wegner, who I became a good friend with, absolutely incredible, wonderful human being. And Dr. Goldstein as well. He passed away as well. He and I became good friends. But I don't remember. There was a constellation of planners, academia and practicing planner, but I think Dr. Wegner, Professor Wegner was one of those. Asked if I would do a section on the update of the, I think the first one was 1971, I'm not sure, of the Educational Foundation Handbook, which as far as I'm concerned, that could be used in planning schools all over the country. If I would do a section on urban planning, and I was very honored I did that. I wrote it, and was published, and my understanding it's been used for over 20 years here, UT Austin, and Texas A&M. I know that because David Pugh told me it was. And so I'm very, very proud and very honored by that. And I understand it's used in other publications and around the country too, by other planners and other planning schools since then.
How about training activities? Do you work with planning commissioners or the public in terms of, you kind of alluded to educating people. What are some of the things you've done along those lines?
I was asked in the early and mid 80s to participate with some other planners at the city of McKinney, presenting on a Saturday over a couple of years planning programs, what comprehensive planning is, the relationship to other, I did that. And starting in the early 80s, Professor Wegner specifically asked me, 83, 84, 86, 87, if I would come of an evening and discuss with the graduate class comprehensive planning, but also on several weekends, again, also with Dr. Goldstein, AICP preparation programs, focusing in on comprehensive plans and other parts as well. And making presentations at national and state APA conferences, sometimes by myself, but many times with other as well. If you'll allow me, I want to mention two colleagues over 25 or 30 years that are very, very deep personal and professional friends, Rick Leisner and Robert Prejean, who I think all the planners in Texas know. First-class human beings, enormous contributions to the planning profession, and I'm proud and happy to call them my dear friends and my professional colleagues. I wanted to mention that in this, so they're memorialized forever too in this.
Well, that kind of leads into my next question. Are they, looking back in your early career or even later, is there anybody that you kind of look to as a mentor? Is there somebody that kind of helped you along?
Yeah, there's so many people, and this probably sounds trite, even young people who are in the process of obtaining their degrees, you know, you could learn from. Well, I would have to say, this maybe sounds silly, but I certainly don't remember their names. There were some planners when I was in the Navy, and whenever I could, I had the opportunity to do it. These were NATO cruisers showing the U.S. Navy the strength to our European allies. So we had a chance to go on land, sometimes more than other naval personnel. So I spent time going in major European cities whenever I could. And remember the context is that's 15, 16 years after World War II, and a lot of these cities were redeveloping as a result of terrible devastation. And so I was talking to planners. That's frankly what, as I told you, instigated and encouraged me to become a city planner, that in conjunction with the knowledge I had from European cities being a history major. So I would have to say that group of people were mentors. Professor Zimmer in graduate school, Joseph Abel, Director of Planning, Rolf Campbell, Jim Smith, Assistant Director of Planning, Gary Sieb, inculcated, I knew this before, inculcated into me the critical importance of, if you don't agree, listen to what people have to say who are in positions of authority on plan commissions, the city councils develops, etc. Bob Prejean, Rick Leisner, certainly, and I don't know if he's ever going to see it, so it's not brown-nosing, John Godwin, Mr. Gibson, city manager in Rowlett, Paul Gibson, who's the city manager in Lombard, Illinois, a wonderful man, and a sprinkling of other people whose names I can't remember. Joe Huff, he just graduated from Cornell Planning School. This is 1974, he's like 22, 23 years old. I learned a lot of things from him too. Now, having said that, I've learned a lot of things from allied professors, civil engineers, architects, landscape architects, financial planners, a whole host of people whose names I just can't remember. And so if I had 2 hours, I could go in my documents and find their names. But their teaching stuck with me. Is that a reasonable answer?
Yeah, no, that's a lot more than a lot of people have said.
Okay.
The inverse of that question, though, is there are any particular proteges or people that you have mentored that stand out?
Yes, I'll mention that. For the screen, it's not vodka, it's water, distilled water. Okay. There's a young man, I think he's still in Plano. His Ken Schmidt. He actually, East Michigan State University graduate in environmental planning, and then moved down here and received a couple of years ago his master in public administration from University of North Texas, which you probably know. For years has been ranked in the top 10 schools for MPAs. He came to work as an intern at Fairview, and he became interested in planning. As an aside, doesn't make a big deal about this, he's also a captain in the U.S. Army Rangers, and if you think that's easy to attain, you've got another guess. He was overseas in Iraq, 5 years, captain in the U.S. Army, first-class person. And he has, to me, to my face, and to others, said that I taught him a lot. I'm very proud of that. But there's been a whole host. David, I'm sorry, I just can't remember. And if you told me that this was my homework assignment, I would have gone back and do that. But there's been a whole host of, Joe Huff was one. And there are students who visit with me, even at conferences, before they had a formal national APA conference mentor program. They had like side programs where you can go to the national conference and be a mentor. And what I do remember, there were New York University, University of Illinois, San Francisco State, Berkeley, Cornell, Harvard, Michigan State, people that I mentored at these conferences. And I remember on several occasions we were finished and they were so eager to learn. I remember I avoid going to certain classes. I said, I'll meet you over here, we'll talk for 2 hours. And several of them, I hear from them later that they become AACP director of planning, and I talked to them when they were in graduate school. That was very fulfilling to me. I just don't remember all their names.
Sure. If you had to give any advice to a young planner right out of school, what might it be?
Oh, I'm not done yet with the mentors.
Oh,
Okay, thank you. I don't have to beg for an interview because I'm doing it, but you certainly were a mentor in terms of environmental planning. It's very, very critical in all the projects that I deal with. Not just looking at floodplain, but as an aside, I work with the civil engineer. We create a man-made and a natural environmental checklist with dozens and dozens of components. And we put it into, let people know, you look at this to save yourself time and money and be environmentally sensitive, notwithstanding Ian McHarg, who was probably one of you, a mentor for you, and also Craig Farmer, and Gary Sieb, and Dick Lilly, and the professors that I met here. I don't know a lot of them at UT or A&M except David Pugh, and Dr. Goldstein, Dr. Anjumani, absolutely, Bob Wegner, absolutely. And there's been just so many others, but the ones I mentioned made a deep impact on me for a long period of time. Now, you asked me about advice. I hope this doesn't sound trite, but you asked me the question. This is advice you probably learned in grammar school, but don't stop learning, because when you graduate from school, whether you have a bachelor's degree in planning or a master's degree in planning or a PhD in planning, continue to stay involved with APA, understand the new literature that comes out, get Planning Magazine, look at the planning reviews, go to the conferences, because if you think you're going to know everything when you graduate, you're mistaken. So continue to learn and talk to your colleagues and become an AICP, not only for your own personal gratification, but it tells the rest of the world who needs to learn a lot about planning that will enhance the comments that you make to them. So you becoming an AICP not only help yourself, but you help the profession by creating an environment for people to take what you're saying maybe a little bit more seriously. The other, may I go on? The other advice is, I feel very strongly about this. Actually, it should start in graduate school. Many, many years ago, there was a perspective, and maybe it still occurs with some younger planners, that you're at odds with civil engineers, and to a lesser extent, architects and landscape architects. There's nothing farther from the truth. As soon as you can, even in graduate or undergraduate schools, find out what they're doing, find out what they're learning, because when you go out, whether you're working in the public or private sector, any decent project will be involved with civil engineering, landscape architecture, or architecture in conjunction with urban planning, and if it is not, it should be. And then there'll be other, still critical, but secondary to urban planning, the financial component, the marketing component, very, very critical. You may have the best recommendations for what makes sense in terms of land use, but you need to be sensitive to the market dynamics. These entities are not at odds with professional planning. They're parts of it. Number three, recognize that if you're dealing with zoning or a site plan or a plat, it's part of the long-range planning. They're not done in isolation. You're evaluating individual entities, but they're part of a long-range piece. So item 4, wherever your role is, try to be involved with the preparation or and the commitment and the ongoing enhancement and implementation of a long-range comprehensive plan. Everything you do, one way or another, will have a linkage to that. Those are the things that immediately come to mind.
We've talked about APA, but are there any other professional organizations or just organizations in general that you've been active in?
Not really, and I hope it's not an excuse, but just uh, trying to spend as much time in my job in conjunction with my family and some friends. And if I was going to join another organization, it would be just to get the literature, which I can and do get anyway. But my exclusive professional involvement has been with the with APA all these years.
You touched on your family. Do you want to talk a little bit about your wife and children?
Yes, sure. My wife is a retired teacher in elementary schools. She, as far as I'm concerned, an expert in child development.
And you met her in Chicago?
Yes, I went to a friend's wedding, and a mutual friend of ours brought her because he had no date, and I met her there, and the rest is history. In fact, Sunday the 25th will be our 46th wedding anniversary. I have 2 children. My daughter will be, I'm sure she won't mind, she'll be 37. She has her own firm which does wedding invitations. She's one of the top 5 in the city. Weddings, confirmations, bar mitzvahs, those sorts of things. And she's very successful, very talented. My son is an architect, graduated from the University of Texas at Austin. Works for Corgan Associates, was one of the senior planners at the North American Toyota headquarters. Very modest and very accomplished. And we lived in the same house that we moved in when we first moved to Dallas on December 4th, 1978. See, I remember that, but I couldn't remember some of the consultants. This is what happens when you're 81. And so I have my brother-in-law and sister-in-law still live in Illinois, actually Evanston, Illinois, great suburbs north of Chicago. My sister lives in Highland Park, Illinois, along the lake, and I have some other nephews and nieces that live in West Chicago, Illinois, which is in DuPage County, and I keep in contact with, to some extent, with some of my friends and professional colleagues in Illinois.
Okay. Well, we've talked about a lot of things today. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you want to talk about? Anything that we left out?
Something that might be of interest to me, you mean? Yeah. Okay. Well, and I realize that the people watching this, and even you, David, may not agree, but, and I hope this doesn't sound trite, many people know or have a general idea what architects, civil engineering, and even to a certain extent what landscape architects do, because a lot of that is in the newspaper, it's in the media. But most people, I'm not sure most, but many people don't know what city and regional planners, urban planners do. For a long time I felt, I wish the national educational associations or other entities would make more of an outreach nationally to let people know what we do as a professional. It's an enormous contribution. And the sooner the better. Young people are going to grow up and be mayors, managers, city managers, members of planning and zoning commissions, city councils, and they're going to make decisions. And the profession makes so many enormous contributions that people see with their own eyes and hear about with their own ears, but don't absorb, because there's an amalgamation of activity that meets with an urban planning project once it gets on the ground. So I just wish that the public was more aware of what we do. And I will continue to encourage people to stay in the profession, go into the profession. We make great contributions, and I would say that I am not only proud but honored to be in this profession. I'm honored that I am a member of AICP, and also honored that I've had the opportunity to work with so many wonderful people such as yourself and the people I mentioned, including the people I didn't remember and didn't mention. And again, I'm very honored and grateful for this opportunity.
Well, I think the pleasure has been all ours, and I want to thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. I appreciate it.